عاشق کرم از نه خدا نه بارم تبار گران کرم دنزانه تچک آخ دنزانه لیلی تبچک جاویت شیرین چه سری من کرد کتم عشقاتلی مخواج بیر کرد او جاویت شیرین چه سری من کرد کتم عشقاتلی مخواج بیر کرد شبان و روژا یارم خونه کرد یارم خونه کرد از رینشتم آما مگازی تر بحسرتم آخ بحسرتم دلال تنها بینم گل و کسر و حوال از دکشینم آخ دلال حسرتي تمام استنابينم فاضلي برندار بكوينم بحسرتي تمام استنابينم فاضلي برندار بكوينم شبان ورجال از دلورينم بحسرتم امان شواد قديم حسرتي تمام استمري
of your target in a nutshell. That map will have different types of information, but any military initiative starts off with reconnaissance, getting a map of the target and planning your entry points, weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and so forth based on targeted points of compromise. The first thing you look for when trying to attack an organization is points of communication or interaction. I have to be able to communicate with the target to attack it. I have to be able to interact with the target to attack it. If I can connect to it and I can talk to it, I can attack it. That's the idea. And that may be physical, technical, or even social. Actually, the weakest link usually in the security chain is the human factor. So a little bit later on, we're going to talk more about social engineering, which it may be a better use of your time to try to hack a human than hack a network. After all, humans already have access. So we will talk about that as part of this module, and we've got a dedicated module for social engineering happening later in the course. So footprinting is divided into two categories. You have passive and you have active. All right, passive is not directly interacting with the target. Active is directly interacting with the target. So we mentioned in the last module that passive in general goes unnoticed. right? I'm not really actively engaging in anything. I'm just sort of sitting by. I'm a fly on the wall. But in being passive, I may not be able to coerce my target into giving up useful information. There's a less of a return on your investment for the time and effort spent in passive activities, since you're really kind of just waiting for things to come floating your way in some respects. In active, you're taking a little bit more risk, you're actively engaging the target, but you get a better return on your investment. If I can ask you specific questions, you'll give me specific answers. Yeah, I notice you're asking me questions, but it's better than just sitting there waiting for you to give me something useful. Now, there's definitely different contexts in which we're going to use those terms, but again, passive without direct, active with direct. Now, we will typically exhaust all of our passive footprinting techniques and then switch over to active. Active reconnaissance, passive reconnaissance. We're going to talk about active information gathering, passive information gathering. And later on throughout the course, we're going to talk about active this, passive that in different contexts. So the definition is going to be a little bit different. Later on in the course, we talk about things like active sniffing versus passive sniffing. So passive also often is referred to as open source intelligence gathering, since I'm gathering information from publicly available sources, not necessarily sources controlled by the target. All right, so what type of information are we looking for in the footprinting phase? We're really interested in employee details at this stage of the game. Employees already have access. They can be hacked, socially engineered. They can be impersonated. They can be phished. They can be vished, etc. So employee details, one of the first orders of business, finding employees of the target organization, building social media profiles and profiles on the individual employees. Telephone numbers. Again, to attack a target, you need to be able to interact with it. That most definitely can be done over the phone. Social engineering, phishing attacks. Okay, branch and location details, background of the organization, web technologies. Now, this is all stuff that you're going to gather as part of your methodology, but it's not necessarily a magic bullet, any one of these items. Now, going through this process, invariably, you're going to collect something that's useful in later stages. We're not saying that every little nugget is always going to prove to be useful, but the collective, the aggregate of all this information, something will help you to compromise that target. Network information, domains and subdomains, network blocks, okay, IP ranges that we can scan. Now, some of this will be fuel for later activities, like in the scanning phase. So network blocks, for example, IP ranges, we're going to utilize that information when we configure our scanners in the scanning phase. Network topology, trusted routers and firewalls, IP addresses of reachable systems, who is records, DNS records. And we'll be referencing a lot of this in a dedicated slide. System information, web server OS. Now, the web server discussion happens a little bit later in the course. There's footprinting that precedes most of these phases. The web server phase, we're gonna talk more about hacking web servers, hacking web applications. I'm gonna table a lot of the website or web server footprinting for that discussion, but it is definitely important, don't get me wrong. Okay, locations of the web servers, publicly available email addresses, usernames and passwords. All right, search engines. All right, search engines have already done a lot of information gathering for you. After all, that's what they do. Google, Bing, Yahoo, Ask.com, etc. Their whole mission in life is to crawl the internet, index what they find, and make it locatable by you, the requester, through a series of keyword queries, right? In a nutshell, it's pattern matching. When you do a keyword search in Google, it responds back with matches to that keyword. And we can get really specific on where we're going to find those keywords and what kinds of keywords we're looking for that indicate exploitable conditions, login pages, things like that. But Google has already done a lot of your active information gathering for you. You can utilize it in a passive way to not directly engage the target, but still collect useful information about the target indirectly. So the Google Advanced Search Operator is specific syntax that allows you to craft specific queries that elicit specific results. There's actually a database, more than one, of known Google search queries that find different types of interesting information. Now, in the lab, you're going to go through several examples of Google Advanced Search Operator syntax and usage. I'm going to show you some of the basics here in the next couple slides. All right, so the advanced Google hacking techniques. So I'm going to hop over to my 2019 machine and let's open a web page. All right, and let's search for EC Council. Enter. All right, that's going to come back with some advertisements, some top hits, top searches, top results, but everything has the term EC Council in the results. All right, I click on the first link. It takes me to eccouncil.org. Now, at this point, I'm actually actively engaging the target. All right, at this point, I'm not. I'm actually using Google Search Query to gather information indirectly. Now, a couple things. If I was to do an in title, index of, for example, this is one of the classics, the keyword search is going to be found in the title of the web page. So when I click on that, I get a directory browsing enabled site and a bunch of video files. Now you find movie collections and MP3 collections and a lot of other stuff in these index ofs. Now again, if it's a website you're not supposed to access, we're supposed to stay away, just saying. So the keywords appear in the title of the page. Now there's also some classic examples of in titles in index ofs where it gives us the web server version that we're actually looking at. And there's a great example of it right there. An Apache 2.4.38 Debian server, yada, yada, yada. That's a banner. Now, a little bit later on, we're going to learn about the importance of banners. Banners give us specific software versions that have specific known vulnerabilities. So one aspect of an index of is banner grabbing. All right, there's also, for example, login. Let's do in title login, site, eccouncil.org. All right, now it's going to find any websites with login in the title page under eccouncil.org. So one example is your Aspen account. That's a login page. So why do I care about that? Because it's a login page. That may be brute forceable or dictionary attack, or you steal a set of credentials from an employee and you log in. All right, there are other advanced search operators, but that gives you an idea of what they are and what they do. Cache, link, related, info, site, and then the all-in statements say all keywords need to be in the title or in the URL, etc., location, and there's even more than that. Now the lab will take you through different examples of that. You get a pretty good feel for Google Advanced Search Operators. And these can be really involved and very intricate and very complex. The Google Hacking Database is maintained by the folks at Offensive Security, who also maintain the Exploit Database. And this is a database of Google dorks, which are, first off, Google dork is a derogatory term for the administrator who carelessly leaves things on their website so that Google can index it and people can find it. The Google dork has kind of evolved to also mean the search string or the syntax. So the GHDB has lots of different dorks with different keyword configurations and advanced operators that find different things. In title of in URL, files containing juicy info. You'll find login pages, you'll find files that indicate vulnerabilities, etc., etc. All right, so that is Google search engine hacking. which is a little bit misleading because you're not really hacking Google. You're just using its syntax provided very specifically to find very specific results. All right, some examples of Google Dorks for VPN footprinting to the Google Hacking Database. VPNs are especially interesting because they are VPN connections to the organization, right? VPNs are ways to log in across an untrusted medium, their login portal. So invariably, that's interesting to an attacker because if they're compromised, they give you an access hatch to the network. All right, so again, there's some examples of some of the Google Dorks or syntax included in the Google Hacking Database. All right, finding a company's top-level domains, TLDs, and subdomains. Now, when you do a search on EC Council will have several sites in the eccouncil.org domain. Any one of those sites might have vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So finding what hosts and what subdomains are constructed or found under eccouncil.org, there we go, is useful to the attacker so they can further examine footprint and perform reconnaissance. And there's lots of utilities that will do domain and subdomain enumeration. One of the classic examples is Netcraft. So when I click on netcraft.com and I go to the resources, search DNS, for example, and I search for eccouncil.org and search, there are a bunch of sites in eccouncil.org with site rankings and statistics for each site. Now, they'll give you the basics, the server OS, the NetBlock when it was first seen, but any one of these may have vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Now, in addition to that, you've got some command line utilities, you've got Perl and Python scripts, Sublister, and a bunch of others for enumerating DNS domains and subdomains. All right, people searching on social networking sites and people search services. When you find an employee name that works for the target, then your next order of business is to find out as much as you can about that employee so that you may actually be able to use them as an impersonation vector or a social engineering vector to try to either log into the network resources as them or get them to click on a phishing link or something along those lines. So social networking services like Facebook post way too much information about people's personal and professional lives. Probably one of the best for information gathering, social media-wise, for purpose of attacking is going to be LinkedIn, because LinkedIn gives you employees that work for the target organization, they give you skill sets, they give you email addresses, resume information, things like that. But Facebook gives a lot of personal details, things that might be used as passwords, password reset questions, things along those lines. And then they're also always useful for impersonation attacks for social engineering, just as a communications channel. So that person who connects to you on Facebook or LinkedIn may not actually be who they say they are. And that's really useful for social engineers to not have to stand face to face with their target, because they give a lot away in body language. When we are physically distant from the individual and we're communicating with them two-dimensionally through, bits being sent back and forth, it's a lot easier to impersonate and be believable. And on top of that, if they're ever caught, they're way out of reach for arrest or extradition or incident response. So there's lots of social networking sites out there. LinkedIn specifically, the Harvester tool is one of several tools that will perform enumeration on LinkedIn. Now you're going to be running through a lab on LinkedIn using the Harvester, find employees of target organization. There's also InSpy and EmpSpy and a bunch of other scripts. All of these utilities will automate what's otherwise a manual process. So if I wanted to find employees of EC Council on LinkedIn, I could run manual searches for EC Council employees and so forth, or I could automate the process by using a crawler, spider, harvester, scraper utility that automates that process. So in a nutshell, these type of utilities will start off at the main page. They'll work their way through a series of queries. They'll extract useful information. And we've had email harvesters for decades for building spam lists and things like that. They quite simply scour through a website looking for something at something or something that matches an email address format. So the harvester, for example, will give you a list of employees found on LinkedIn. In the example here, they're using Microsoft, but you can specify the company, specify the database. You can actually use other search engines. You're going to be running through a lab on the harvester. All right, harvesting email lists. Other types of email spiders, like I said, these have been around for decades. Their whole purpose in life is to build email lists. Spamming, hoaxes, social engineering, phishing. Phishing. After all these years, phishing is still a wonderfully effective attack vector. Humans should know by now that if an email seems suspicious, don't click on anything in the email. We have email phishing campaigns done periodically at work, and you seem to have the same repeat offender. Bob, man, dude, this is like the 7th time you keep clicking on these links. Guess what? You've been scheduled for security awareness training again. Phishing emails are, again, incredibly effective. Later on, we're going to take a look at constructing a phishing email, but sometimes they're really slick. I mean, sometimes almost got me, and sometimes they're horrendous. Really? Is that your best effort? Really? This is horribly grammatically incorrect. You have low resolution logo images, things like that. So they come in varying degrees of polish and sophistication. But at the end of the day, phishing emails, it's a numbers game. You send out enough of them, people are going to click on them. So how do we target those individuals? We extract their email addresses by harvesting email lists. All right, then footprinting through job sites. Now, it would stand to reason that if XYZ company had an opening for a network administrator, they might list successful applicants will possess the following X skill sets, right? Or expertise or certifications. So when you've got somebody that's hiring on looking for an administration of VMware EXI 6.x hosts, I'm pretty sure they use VMware ESXi within their infrastructure, right? So this flat out gives away different technologies used internally. Office 365, Active Directory structure. All right, Exchange 2016, Citrix NetScaler. My gosh, they're given the specific versions. Now, it's not uncommon to list that because, of course, you want the right applicant for the job, but giving away that level of detail is a security risk. Security and functionality are polar opposites, and we'll talk more about that as we get into the course. And I would love to say that companies are in business to be secure, but they're not. Companies are in business to make money. And if the security impedes that process, the generation of money typically wins. We'll talk more about that, but we look at that in risk analysis. Now, it sounds really materialistic and, my gosh, money's not everything. It kind of is. For the organization, money is what keeps the company functioning, which allows them to pay their employees, which allows them to feed their families and make a better life and so forth. But without that, if the company is not generating revenue, it's going to shut down and it can't achieve all those other wonderful objectives that they're in business for. So at the end of the day, when you're doing risk analysis, it really usually boils down to cost benefit unless it's military. Now, we don't get a lot into risk analysis in this course. We have some other courses in the catalog that do, but I'm going to talk about it in bits and pieces here and there. We apply security in a cost-effective way. I'm not really sure how I got to there from the footprinting through job sites. Oh, you're trying to find the right employee, investment, and so forth. So giving that detail away may help to ensure the selection of the right employee. Sometimes my brain makes lateral jumps to different topics here, but yeah. All right. So and again, we'll talk more about investigation, so forth, risk analysis, accepting risk, and so forth. We'll mention that in some later discussions. Deep and dark web footprinting. So, okay, there's passive and there's active. We've mentioned that. Open source intelligence gathering, or OSINT, is engaging publicly available resources, which you can access anonymously. The deep web, the dark web, or the dark net are the other dimension to the public internet. Now, it all uses the same infrastructure and physical connectivity, but the surface web is what you have come to know. It's searchable. You've got DNS resolved to certain websites. You can find it with normal web browsers. Okay, the dark web or the deep web are going to be hidden, unindexed, and unlocatable, potentially without special software like the Tor browser. So you'll use an anonymizer, most likely in the form of the Tor, network using a Tor relay agent. The Tor browser is a version of Firefox that browses the dark web through the Onion relay or the Tor network and allows you to access these dark web or darknet resources. Now, these again are not published. They're like the old speakeasies from years ago in the days of Prohibition. You got to know where they are to go looking for them. You definitely don't Google a lot of this stuff. So you can actually look up hackers for hire and so forth. There are some searches that might find resources that are published to the dark web, but it's not your standard surface web DNS. So going through the dark web or the dark net, you might find indicators that your information has been compromised. And there's a lot of identity theft products that will actually tell you, hey, your username and password were found on a dark website, and have I been pwned database, or your credit card numbers have shown up. But the deeper dark web is where the shadier stuff happens on the internet. All right, determining the operating system. Shodan and Census are a different kind of search engine. Shodan, in a nutshell, finds connected devices like routers, servers, IoT, etc., using a variety of search filters or syntax. The idea here is you may search for a specific resource like a VPN or a VoIP, and then find specific IP addresses that match the search criteria, and these IP addresses might belong to your target. So you're kind of searching in reverse. You're finding things that are connected, which we mentioned earlier, and I'll mention repeatedly throughout the course. In order to attack it, I need to be able to get to it, number one, and I need it to listen to me. Number two, I need to have, bend its ear. These devices have already been, just by being in the search results of Shodan, have already shown to be connected to the internet and reachable. And this also, again, breaks them down in different categories. You may actually see, sites exhibiting vulnerabilities and so forth. And then those can actually be matched up with your target potentially. So Shodan and Census find connected devices, servers, exposed, routers, gateways, and that sort of thing. All right, then back to social engineering. All right, so social engineering has been around way longer than computers, right? It goes back to the dawn of time. Humans, since the dawn of time, have been deceiving each other, right? So, hey, I'm gonna work, manipulate, lie, con, cheat, steal from you. It's part of our nature, I suppose. Now, I'd like to think some are more honest than others, and humans have a tendency to believe what they're told. We tend to be trusting and good-natured by default until we've been burned, and then we become overly suspicious. So the attackers use social engineering tricks to gather sensitive information from social networking websites, creating a fake profile using the false identity to lure employees. This is just one aspect. So when you're socially engineered, somebody is lying to you or deceiving you to extract useful information, and there's a variety of ways to go about doing this as it relates to hacking networks. Humans already have access, we mentioned that before, and I could potentially use your password and your username, or I could impersonate you. I could use your name in a password reset request to a help desk, which we'll look at some different scenarios on that in Module 9. So one of the possibilities is creating a fake profile using the false identity to lure employees into revealing sensitive information. All right, now social networking sites, again, give away way too much information about a person's personal life and may be useful in extracting details that may lead to the believability of their cover story or persona, and may also be used in things like password cracking attempts or answering password reset questions. All right, website footprinting. All right, footprinting and recon in general is getting a map of the attack surface of the target. It precedes pretty much every phase we talk about in this course. Website footprinting, I prefer to talk about websites and web applications in modules 13 and 14, and then 15 with SQL injection. So we're going to table most of our website footprinting discussion until later in the course. But in a nutshell, website footprinting would be identifying software used in its version. We're always doing that. You always want to be as specific as you can about the version of software that you are dealing with, because that helps tremendously in precisely selecting the exploits for the vulnerabilities associated with that version. Operating system, scripting platforms, subdirectories and parameters, file name, path, database name, or query. And we're going to visit the burp suite in later modules. Monstrously powerful utility, really useful. But at this stage of the game, we're not really ready to do any web application analysis, vulnerability scanning, or interception and modification of data in transit. But believe me, we will come back to the almighty burp and OWASP Zap, which is a very similar tool put out by the OWASP organization. All right, HTML source code. Again, we'll table most of this for a little bit later in the course. But HTML source code may give you some insights or some clues into exploitable vulnerabilities. And then comments. Comments in the source code are supposed to be removed when that code goes live or into production. And I can't tell you how many times I've found login credentials in the source code of web pages. The developer leaves it there to facilitate testing and deployment and puts it there for whatever reason to communicate with other developers, and they forget to take it out before the site goes live, or it goes up for testing and an archived version shows up on archive.org that they don't know about, and then that's locatable and retrievable by attackers through Footprinting and Recon. And we're going to look at archive.org here a little bit later in this module. All right, cookies. All right, cookies are, in a nutshell, little notes to self from the web server. They're set by the web server, you hold on to them, you send them back to the web server, replay the cookie, and it helps the web server keep track of what you've been doing in previous visits or what you've been doing with other websites that website is able to monitor and track. When you browse the internet, tracking cookies will give all sorts of information about what sites you visited, what products you've looked at. If you ever log into a website after viewing products on Amazon, you see the same products on that website. That is not coincidence. That's a tracking cookie. Cookies may also give you useful information, session identifiers we'll talk about later on, software in use and its behavior, scripting platforms used, etc. So again, we're going to revisit all this in our web server, web application, and SQL injection discussions. All right, website footprinting using web spiders. All right, in a nutshell, the web is a series of interconnected links. A spider walks the web link to link to link. So the whole spidering concept is spidering down from link to link to link and doing it in an automated fashion. Now, if I log into a website like EC Council, there's a bunch of links on that page. I click on one link, I'm taken to another page. It has a bunch of links on that page. I click on one link, it takes me to another page. To methodically exhaust all those links, as a human, I'm going to get confused and lost pretty quickly. A spider makes note of everything and then traverses it all methodically, and it's a tool that does it specifically and methodically more effectively than the human brain. I'm going to miss something because I'm human, right? A web spider, an automated tool, is going to exhaust all possible links, and it's going to spider the entire website, which is really just browsing the whole thing. Google, Bing, Yahoo, etc. do the same thing when they're indexing content for searching on a search engine. So spidering, crawling, traversing, etc., all the same concept. You're navigating through all the links and sublinks of all these pages, and then harvesting, scraping, copying, enumerating is extracting useful information. So a user-directed spidering operation would be using an intermediary like Burp, for example, and then browsing the website through the proxy, and it actually records each page request and each response. So that's user directed, where you're actually navigating manually, still may miss something. And then automatic is you just tell the spider, here's the landing page, go for it, and it does it for you automatically. All right, a web data extractor or other harvesting utility is quite simply going to pull useful information like emails, phone numbers, faxes, URLs, links, meta tags, etc., and put them in a nice ordered list for you. So this is the same concept as the email harvester we looked at a few slides back. And you'll be running through a lab where you're harvesting or spidering just by running a script for email accounts for, say, ecouncil.org. All right, mirroring an entire website. Can I make a copy of a website? Absolutely. What do you mean you can't make a copy of a website? Sure you can. If you're browsing a website, you're making a copy of each page, you're downloading it and replaying it in the browser. What's to stop you from making a copy of the whole thing and then linking everything together so it's a browsable local copy? The answer to that is nothing. Now, there may be some back-end functionality that you can't replicate, but I can make a copy of a website. We've been able to do this for decades. Windows 2000, and probably earlier than that, but that's the first OS I remember where you could take a website offline. So Windows 2000, take the website offline, cache all the content locally. Now you get on a plane, which once upon a time, we didn't have internet access on planes. Man, that was the dark ages. You can actually browse a website while you're in the plane. Nowadays, you just connect to GoGo in-flight internet and browse directly. So mirroring an entire website, why would I care? Because you can make a clone copy of the website. Again, why would I care? Because now you can impersonate that website. Again, I ask, why do I care? Well, you could stand up a copy of the website and use that to collect employee login information. It's a pretty good reason. Yeah, but you don't need to copy the whole website for that. You can just clone the login page. Later on in the course, when we build our phishing email, we're going to use the social engineering toolkit, and that's going to clone just the login page and eliminate the unnecessary fluff, and we'll capture the login credentials and then just redirect them to the live site so they think they fat fingered their password. So we will come back to that a little bit later on. All right, so mirroring the entire website. I can also mirror it for offline analysis, code review, et cetera, and there's lots of utilities for mirroring the entire website. HTTP Track Website Copier, Black Widow, Teleport Pro, et cetera. Archive.org. All right, the Internet Archive Wayback Machine from the Internet Archive Board. Their whole purpose in life is to archive the internet. Wow, that's pretty ambitious. You're going to archive the entire internet. Okay, if we take a look at it, go to archive.org, the Wayback Machine, they have already archived 702 billion pages on the internet. They're doing a pretty good job so far. The one I always like to archive search is eccouncil.org, because this takes me back to the old EC Council website years ago in 2005 when I was sitting my first CEH course. And I remember this vividly. Go back to 2005. Actually, I'm going to go back to the first sighting here, and then we'll take a look at 2005. All right, you can go back to the year, and then the calendar view. Highlighted dates will show you snapshots of the website at that time and date. So for example, June 8th, 2002 was the first sighting of eccouncil.org. I'm going to click on 10/003/43 time of day. And after a little bit of spin up time, it's going to load the older EC Council website. Boy, we've come a long way on the website for sure. So this is back in the early Joomla templates, but pretty glitzy for the time. And again, you've got a timeline here with multiple years and multiple dates and time snapshots. Now, why would I care about this? Because there may be something useful or sensitive on an archive copy of that page that's still useful today. Maybe there's developer comments in the source code, gives away something useful. The archived copies can be browsed and even spidered like a live copy. As a matter of fact, you can still download exploits from the old Millworm site, which is the predecessor to the modern day exploit DB maintained by Offensive Security. So sites that are no longer around, you still may actually be able to download tools from them. Pretty cool. So we like archive.org and the Wayback Machine. All right, tracking email communications. Email tracking, there's two flavors of this. First off, why would I care about tracking an email? You might want to get the physical location or the IP information of the sender or the recipient. So an email that I've received will include the email header. That's what all this going on is. That email header has, amongst other useful items, receive fields. Okay, the receive fields give me IP addresses that the email was received from. And if you go all the way down to the bottom of the header, you find that initial received, which may give you the internal RFC 1918 address. We'll talk more about that in the next module. And then the public address for the gateway. All right, the email communications can be tracked just by manually searching the IP information for geolocation, or you can use an email tracking tool like Email Tracker Pro. Now, for whatever reason, my lab environment is having real problems with installing a new version of Email Tracker Pro. I just made some updates and now made some new VM images and migrated them. I just bought a new laptop, which I'm running off. I absolutely love it. But every time I do that, stuff has a tendency to get weird. And for whatever reason, I can't install. I'm having a Java conflict installed on my server 2016s. Now in the lab, you're going to run through an example of Email Tracker Pro. So I'm going to kind of talk through it here, but it will show you a crosshair on a map where that IP address is registered. And my other versions, my Windows 10 has expired, 2019 has expired, and I can't get to install anything else. And that recently became an issue, and I haven't rectified it yet, but now we got the new V12 lab environment, so it's time to build an 11 machine, a 2022 machine, a new 2019 machine, so I'll probably just start everything from scratch. But I've got an example. I had a student in a night class that I still use his email as an example years ago that said, I'll send you an email and you tell me where I'm physically sitting right now. I said, all right, send me an email. So he sends me an email, and that email, I still got the header for it. I fired up Email Tracker Pro. I copied this header in and I said, hey, are you sitting in Navarre, Florida? He's like, oh my gosh, that's creepy. Yes, I am. Okay, demystified. It's just grabbing the receive fields, okay, internal address and external address. So his ISP, the range was registered to client.mchsi.com, and they're based out of Navarre, Florida. So you can do that manually, or you can use cool utilities that draw crosshairs on a map for it. All right, so that's an email that I've received that I still have the header. Okay, an email that I've sent, that's a different story altogether. When you send an email to the recipient, you don't get access to the envelope again, right? That header is gone, out of your control, out of your reach. So what you can do is put a downloadable object in that email, if they're using HTML email, that requires the user download an image, file, or whatever from a central source, and then you can collect the source IP address in the request. So you put an embedded object that they have to request upon receipt, and when they request it, the requesting IP address shows up in the request. All right, the whois lookup. The IP registration lookup is based on the whois discussion, whois topic. Whois databases will allow you to look up who is ecouncil.org, who is 170.135.15.20. So you could look up registrations for IP address and for domains. Now, it used to be that this was really, really useful information. Nowadays, it's typically private registrations or anonymous registrations where all you'll get is like network solutions or the private agent. But once upon a time, you ran a who is query and it gave you very specific information about administrative contact, technical contact, phone numbers, emails, physical addresses, etc. Really useful stuff. There are 5 regional internet registries: ARIN, AFRINIC, RIPE NCC, LACNIC, and APNIC, which are the 5 regionally located registration databases. Now, that used to be testable information, not so much anymore. But in case you're wondering what an RIR is, there you go. ARIN is North America, AFRINIC is Africa, RIPE NCC, Latin and Central America, and Asia Pacific. Excuse me. All right, so that who is query, just so we see one in action. I'm going to who is easycouncil.org. And we'll see that it gives me really nothing. Redacted for privacy, redacted for privacy, redacted for privacy, redacted for privacy. Okay, not really useful. All right, and most organizations these days are private registrations. All right, I can also who is the IP address though. I'm just going to pick one randomly, not picking anybody in particular. All right, so it looks like Louisiana Department of Public Safety owns the 170-145 block. All right, so now footprint and recon is, again, you can perform searches and things like that. That's all on the up and up. When you're targeting somebody specifically for purpose of exploitation, it takes on a little bit of a darker overtone. But always have written permission from your target, and you should never get in any trouble. And I picked that one completely randomly. Any individual reference in that in the response was completely random and not my intent to target any specific individual. All right, finding IP geolocation information. Okay, this is just physical location. So probably one of the best examples for that. Let's go ahead and pick our did I close the terminal? I did. I'll just pick another one randomly. All right, I'm going to look up a who is 173.22.45.62. Again, just picking randomly. All right, I'm going to try to find CQ counter here, which is a nice little crosshair view. All right, we'll throw in a 173.14.5.52, for example, and enter. And these are the kind of captchas I like. And I'll probably still get it wrong. Hate those Amazon Web Services captchas. I get them wrong in the first time every time. All right, this particular example is owned by Comcast Business Communications, and you can see that it gives you latitude and longitude. So there you go. There's where the physical location information can come from. And these are typically generalities and not specifics. These are not GPS coordinates. They are the latitude and longitude for the registrar or the registrant, which could cover a large surface area. So they're not crosshairs on somebody's rooftop, not quite that specific. Although sometimes they can be. My particular ISP where I live, if you look up IP address, it actually shows you street and house number because the provider actually publishes that information. So that's IP geolocation information. All right, extracting DNS information. Yeah, all right, 2 aspects to this. You got the DNS queries themselves running over UDP port 53, and you have the DNS zone transfer running over port TCP 53, which gives you a big, juicy piece of network footprint information if it allows the transfer. So first off, DNS queries are meant to find IP addresses for user-friendly information, right? User-friendly names. We do great with www.facebook.com. We don't do so great with 206.18.4.19. I'm never going to remember that. So for the longest time, we've had user-friendly machine names that are resolved to less user-friendly IP addresses that are resolved to even less user-friendly MAC addresses ultimately. So you have a couple different layers of resolution. The record types can help you find interesting devices in the target environment. Mail servers, name servers, servers, domain controllers, that sort of thing. So we're going to pick some of this back up. In a later discussion, we talk about host discovery and scanning, but DNS review, A record, IP, host to IP address, MX record mail server, NS name server, SRV service records like domain controllers, C names or aliases, they point back to an existing A record, and then your MX and NS do as well. So some of these might require 2 resolutions to identify the actual IP address. And then responsible person, hinfo and txt may or may not be included. Text records could actually be things like domain verifications and that sort of thing. And the start of authority record gives you the primary authoritative server for the zone. It gives you the zone serial number, parameters for doing zone transfers. All right, a reverse DNS lookup. A PTR record can be useful since that PTR record maps an IP address resolves back to a host name. When you run a PTR query for an IP, you'll actually get responded back with multiple host names if they all reside at the same IP. So this can actually give you multiple websites running on the same server. And the PTR query is also a useful way to do host enumeration, identify live hosts on the network through DNS versus a ping sweep, which we'll talk more about that in the next module. So reverse DNS lookup is, again, IP to host name. A normal DNS lookup is a host name to IP. All right, locating the network range. Okay, the network range is useful to implement scanning. All right, locating the network range may or may not be entirely owned by the target. So when you get an IP address for a target web server and you turn that into its classful network range, like an A, B, or C range, there may be some IP addresses in there you're not authorized to scan. So typically, you're going to want to know exactly what IPs are allowable to assess. Otherwise, you can get in some hot water assessing targets that you don't have permission to assess. So locating the network range can be performed with a whois. It can also be deduced, again, from responding hosts and IP addresses, the web server, gateways, trace routes, and that sort of thing. Speaking of trace routes, the trace route allows you to map out the route between your host and the target. A trace route program can work with ICMP, TCP, or UDP packets. Now, ICMP, we're going to talk more about ICMP and TCP and UDP in the next module. We start talking about scanning. But ICMP is a layer 3 protocol. It uses message types and codes to elicit response messages from receiving systems, verify subnet information, and a bunch of other stuff. But it doesn't use port numbers. All right, TCP and UDP are both transport layer protocols. They're going to both use 0 through 65,535 port numbers, and you can use them also, again, to perform port scanning, which is typically what we're going to look at more with TCP and UDP in the next module. But these will send a request to a specific port number from a specific port number, and you can actually get better results potentially by modifying port numbers to include like a port 80 request, and we'll talk more about that. You don't really tune ICMP the same way. ICMP has a higher degree of likelihood of being filtered because it's been heavily misused over the years. We're going to have most of this discussion in the next module. But an ICMP trace route may not give you as accurate a response as a TCP and a UDP, but ICMP is oftentimes the default, the ping sweeps and so forth typically use the default ICMP. But again, we'll talk about all that in the scanning module. But when you run different trace routes and different protocols, you may see different results. So let's back up a step. I don't think I had talked through exactly what a trace route is yet. A trace route is a series of outbound requests with incrementing time to live values. Every packet that you send has a death counter on it. It's called a time to live. And it gets decremented every time your packet takes a hop, which means crosses a router. So it goes down by 1 for every router it crosses, and eventually, that's Pac-Man sound, by the way, it dies to keep it from bouncing around endlessly in cyberspace if the destination is undeliverable. So when I increment my TTLs by 1 for each hop, I get the responses back from each router along the way. Hop, 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 hop. It allows me to build a network map based on subnet ranges that the IP addresses would belong to. That helps me to build a network topology. So primarily, trace routes were meant to identify failure domains when you got a connectivity issue, right? You send out the pings, and when you start getting asterisks, then that's where the communications break down or it's being dropped. So trace routes can be facilitated, again, using TCP, UDP, or ICMP. And really, anything that is incrementing TTLs on the way out would be equally as effective. But trace routes give us an idea of the subnets between us and the target and help you to identify what are public and what are private subnets. And there's more to it than that, but that's the basics. All right, footprint through social engineering. There's a myriad of possibilities on how to manipulate humans. Find something that's believable, get the human to bite. They're going to present you with what information you request. Typically, as long as you identify yourself as an authorized recipient of the information that you're requesting. Now, we're going to keep this definition short and sweet at this stage of the course. Later on in the social engineering module, we'll dig into this a little bit deeper. But social engineering or social engineers attempt to gather anything useful: credit card details, usernames and passwords, security products, operating systems, network layout information, IP addresses and names of servers, et cetera, et cetera. It's easier to hack the human than it is to hack technology, as a general rule. Sometimes hacking technology is effortless, default configurations, known vulnerabilities, but humans invariably are the weak link in the security chain. Eavesdropping, shoulder surfing, dumpster diving, and impersonation are all examples of social engineering techniques. Eavesdropping, the conventional eavesdropping, is listening in on somebody else's conversation. So you're leaning in with your ear, you're listening to what somebody's saying. It doesn't have to be with your 2 ears. It can be done with eavesdropping equipment, packet protocol analyzers, remote shotgun microphones, remote listening equipment. So any interception of any form of communication, audio, video, or text, we're going to classify as eavesdropping. Shoulder surfing. Look over somebody's shoulder while they type in a password or they view something sensitive. Pretty straightforward. Dumpster diving. People are invariably careless about what they throw in the trash, thinking that that dumpster is some sort of unrecoverable abyss. It's not. So there can be a lot to gain if you go diving in the dumpster. People jot down sensitive stuff all the time. Post-it notes are nice and yellow. People jot down passwords and notes on those types of slips. There's internal documents, etc. And even shredded content can be reassembled. Ribbon cut shreds, you can actually reassemble fairly easily. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. My wife would love that. She loves jigsaw puzzles. So cross-cut shredding is a better option. And then impersonation is just pretending to be a legitimate or authorized person over the phone or the communication medium. To make it more believable, they may have researched this individual through social media, employee profile verification on LinkedIn, etc. We've been talking about that pretty much all module. So humans already have access to the network. Impersonating or attacking them can be one of the paths of less resistance. All right, now there are some automated footprinting tools like Maltego and Recon NG. Your final lab in this module will be Recon NG. Some of your non-core labs, Maltego and FOCA, are cool as well. But our core lab that we're going to be demonstrating the course in the lab videos is Recon NG. It wraps a lot of these functions into one framework, builds a database, and allows you to aggregate and compile results. All right, FOCA and OSR framework, also two very multifaceted footprint recon tools. And you can also write your own scripts, bash shell scripts. And we actually do more of that in the CPENT course, writing tools from scratch. But there are tons of footprint recon tools out there that automate the process. You're going to be taking a look at a few examples in your labs. All right, so that's going to wrap us up for Module 2, Footprinting Reconnaissance. That's our first step of the hacking cycle. Up next, we're going to use some of that information to perform scanning, which is the second phase of the hacking module.